Okay, so we're going to continue on talking about operations with functions. And in the previous couple of videos, we've talked about how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with just putting x in to the function and then also putting a number in. And so we're going to do this also by looking at a function in different ways, like graphs and things of that sort. And so when evaluating combinations of functions, remember this alternate notation. We've talked about that in the last two videos that you've watched. You have seen that, where we have what I'm referring to as the original notation, and then the alternate notation is this one. And so the the same goes for putting a number in. F plus g of 2, for example, is f of 2 plus g of 2, and so on. So that's really important to understand as we move into evaluating functions and adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing functions in these next examples. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take these two graphs, and we have the f of x is the red graph that you see, and then g of x is the V shape, that blue graph. And what we want to do is we want to find f plus g of 1, f minus g of 0, f times g of negative 1, and f divided by g of negative 2. So for the first one, we need to find f plus g of 1. And if you remember, that means find f of 1 and add it to g of 1. Well, previously, back in section 2.3, we talked about how to evaluate functions by looking at the graph. And so what we said is that we would go to where our x value is 1, which in this case is here, and then we would find the value of y in function f. Well, in this case, it's at this point. And so in this case, f of 1 is positive 3. And we're going to add to that g of 1. Well, for function g, when the x value is 1, the y value is also 1. And so then we're just going to add 3 and 1, and we get 4. And so when we add these two functions, and we put 1 in for both functions, that's what we get. So we should be able to find f minus g now of 0. Because again, that means find f of 0 and subtract g of 0 from it. And so we're going to look and see, well, when x is 0, which again is here, what is our y value in function f? Well, it's this point at the top, this positive 4. And we're going to subtract from that g of 0. Well, function g, it has the x as 0, y also being 0 because it goes to the origin. And so g of 0 is also 0. And so we're going to subtract those. 4 minus 0 is 4. Then we're going to do the same thing with f times g, this time of negative 1. And so we want to find f of negative 1, and we want to multiply that by g of negative 1. So what is f of negative 1? Well, again, find the x value of negative 1, and go up until you're on function f, which is here. So that's positive 3. And we're going to multiply that by g of negative 1. So again, go back to where x is negative 1 and go up until you're on function g. And its y value is positive 1. And so we multiply 3 times 1 and we get 3. Again, hopefully not too big of a problem. And then for the last one, we're going to find f divided by g of negative 2. So we need to find f of negative 2 and divide that by g of negative 2. And so f of negative 2 is this point, right? Where x is negative 2, this graph goes through that point. And so the y value is 0. And then g of negative 2 is going to be this point. Because again, if x is negative 2, the y value on function g, which is positive 2. And then as you simplify that, 0 divided by 2 is simply 0. If you have any questions about that, feel free to let me know. This is one of the problems that is fairly simple once you get what's going on, but understanding what's going on is maybe a little bit of a problem for some of you. So if you do have questions, please email me and let me know, and I can go back through this with you if I need to, or if we need to do something else, we can do that as well. All right, so look at these. We're going to do basically the same thing here, but this time it's pretty easy to figure out f of x and g of x because we can see those two functions. So I've given you the x value here, and then f of x, so f of whatever number is going to be in this column, and then g of whatever number is going to be in that third column. And so again, we are asked to find f plus g of 1. And so we're going to find f of 1. We're going to add that to g of 1. And that should give us our answer. So when x is 1, what is the y value in function f? Well, we see it is 1. And then in function g, when x is 1, the y value is 6. And so we add those together. 1 plus 6 is going to give us 7. Again, not a huge problem if you can find those numbers, because we all know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And so on the next one, we have f minus g of 0. So again, here, when x is 0, we want to find f of 0. And we're going to subtract g of 0 from it. Well, f of 0 is negative 1. And we're going to subtract g of 0, which is 4. So negative 1 minus 4 is negative 5. So, go to the next one. We have f times g of negative 1. So, we're going to find f of negative 1, multiply that by g of negative 1. And f of negative 1, now here in that row, for function f of negative 1 is negative 3. And we're going to multiply that by g of negative 1, which is 2. And negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. There is our solution. And then for the last one, we're going to find f divided by g of negative 2, which means we're going to find f of negative 2 divided by g of negative 2. And then f of negative 2 is negative 5. G of negative 2 is 0. So we have a problem here. This actually is a typo when I originally made this out, but we can still go with it. So we can't divide by 0. And so because of that, this is considered to be undefined. So if you have any questions about finding that, please let me know.